Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Anicca vata sankhara upadavaya dhammino upajitava nirujanti te samvupa samosukho. So this is the first time I'm here giving a talk in the temple. So in case my mind goes completely blank and there's long periods of silence, then I suppose I would ask you to imagine this to be a meditation workshop, and then just stay with the breath, the meditation, allowing the mind to come back to the present moment. So with so many recent deaths, people who have passed away, George Sharp, whose funeral we will have soon, Ajahn Santamano's mother, various other long-term supporters of the monastery. One of the themes I've been contemplating is impermanence, or the fragility of this human existence. How this body, it's if we consider compared to almost everything else we see around us, how fragile it is, how delicate, and yet we assume we live our lives as if it is something that will last forever. So then there's the 5 subjects for frequent recollection, which are we often chant in the pujas. So there's that one is considering the fact of aging, the fact of sickness, the fact of death, the fact that everything that is beloved, pleasing, will become separated from me, will become otherwise. And then considering that whatever action we may do, then that becomes our dwelling place. If we do good action, then that leads to a good result. If we do bad action or actions that cause harm to oneself and others, that leads to a bad result. So then when one first hears about these contemplations, then one can easily think them to be depressing, or a feeling of why does one need to think about these things? Is it not unpleasant enough without bringing these thoughts to mind? The thoughts of aging, illness, death, etc. But then if one contemplates in a right, it's more about putting these thoughts into consciousness, into one's mind, and then observing what is the result that arises based on those thoughts. And then one can consider the purpose. Purpose is not to make the mind depressed, but rather to bring to mind the preciousness of what we have in the present, because we can so easily take these things for granted. The Buddha talked about the three conceits or intoxications. So the conceit of youth, or the conceit of health, or the conceit of life, or being intoxicated with youth, being intoxicated with health, being intoxicated with life. And then based on that intoxication or conceit, one can do actions that cause harm to oneself and others, and hence lead to negative results for oneself. So if one brings these realities just by existing, just by having been born into this human form, these are the realities that one cannot change. One cannot wish if something is subject to aging. One cannot wish, oh, may it not age. If something is subject to illness, one cannot wish. Just by wishing, one cannot make it take away the possibility of illness. If something is subject to death, just by wishing, one cannot make it not subject to death. So then, by bringing these thoughts to mind, then one can consider how is it that I am using this life, and whatever this life may be. We do not. We assume we know what it is to be alive, but if we try to look more closely, we can see that we in fact don't know. It's something very strange. Just by thinking about it, I can move this hand up and down, and yet it's the same material as the other material objects, this body. And yet I can't move this other objects around just by thinking about them. And then if we bring that mindfulness of impermanence, mindfulness of death to mind, then one can observe the result. What is it that arises? And one thing that can arise is a sort of contemplation that how is it that we are living our lives? What is it that we give importance to? What is it that we value? Because these things we can, if we do not consider the reality of impermanence, then we can seek satisfaction, seek happiness in things that are inherently unsatisfactory, inherently impermanent. And then one can also start to consider the preciousness of what we have in this present moment, and then the choice we have in each moment. How does one live one's life in this moment? What action through body, speech or mind does one give emphasis to? Does one put one's effort into doing? what are the things in our lives which we wish to give importance to. At the start of the talk, I chanted the verse that is traditionally chanted at funerals. So, anicca vata sankhara, all conditioned things are impermanent. Upadavaya dhammino, having arisen, they pass away. Upadava, these. And then, as they pass away, and then in that passing away is a peace or a happiness. So that can sound very strange when one first hears it. How is it that in noticing impermanence, how does that lead to happiness? Today I was talking to someone and they were saying they had listened to a talk from one of the Ajahns in Mapjan, and they were saying, the Ajahn was saying that if one really contemplates impermanence, it's if sadness arises, then one is not really contemplating impermanence, because it's rather a joyfulness that arises if one really contemplates impermanence. Ordinarily, we can seek happiness in various experiences, various things we may feel, things we may taste, touch, smell, and a whole range of other experiences. But then, if we notice that that upon which we have based our happiness, that is impermanent, then there can be a sort of disenchantment, a sort of awakening or noticing that that which we give responsibility of our happiness to, that is unreliable. And then if one notices that, then there can be that dispassion, that a sort of disillusionment with seeking happiness in that object, in that changeable, unconstant object. And then there can be that sort of relief or a sort of letting go of a certain not needing to seek happiness in those various unreliable objects, and a sort of deeper peacefulness can arise. So then in one of the ways in contemplating anicca or impermanence, the Buddha talked about the five khandhas or five aggregates. So these are just general groups or categories one can divide one's experience into. Ordinary experience, just walking from here to there, doing something. So the five, the form or rupa, the physical form, body, material objects, but in terms of the khandhas, the body. Then Vedana or feeling, so not feeling in the sense of emotions, but rather more like a sensation, so pleasant feeling, unpleasant feeling, neutral feeling. And then sanya or perception, So that some people translate it as a memory. So that within experience which recognizes something we perceive. So I can recognize this as a glass, and then as some water, and with something I can drink, or I recognizing this as a clock. Something automatically does that. So that perception. And then there's a sankhara, or mental formations, or this can include a sort of variety of things that have arisen based on causes and conditions. So things like emotions, thoughts, moods, that whole area of experience. And then the final one is a consciousness. So that sense consciousness, eye consciousness, ear sound, consciousness of sounds, that which knows the object of these six senses. And then one can. So usually what we do is, the tendency of the mind is to take these five groups, these five aggregates, and then create a sense of self around them. We take them as permanent. We take them as something that inherently brings happiness, satisfaction. And then the Buddha used a simile of someone who is unable to see, and then someone else comes to them and gives them a dirty cloth and a sort of old, ragged, dirty, unwashed cloth, and then says to them, "Oh, this is a new, beautiful cloth." And then the person who cannot see, they take this cloth and feel attachment to it and wear it. But then they go to a doctor or someone, and then they are able to cure their eyesight. So then, as they open their eyes, then they can see that this cloth is, in fact, very dirty and not very attractive. So then in the sutta, I think the Buddha compares that to the five aggregates. So ordinarily, for the mind, the unenlightened mind that doesn't see the five aggregates as they are, in a sense is taken in by the lie that these are beautiful, these can provide lasting satisfaction. And then one creates a sort of image of a self around it, and then that leads to various kinds of suffering. So then in one's ordinary life, one can bring these five aggregates to mind and consider how in this present experience are these manifesting. This body, how is it that one takes it to be myself? If one hurts oneself or gets a sort of small injury, or if there's pain, how is it that that experience manifests? How do we habitually take this body as myself, and then but then with the contemplation of old age, sickness and death, we can bring to mind, if this body really belonged to us, then we could say to this body, okay, be like this or be like that. But if we notice the body follows its own laws, it follows the laws of nature. If there is illness, then the body responds in a way of illness. If there is pain, the body is uncomfortable. As the body ages, it becomes less capable of doing things. And then so one can bring to mind similarly with feelings. If there's pleasant feelings, and then one attaches to that one allows one's happiness to be determined by that pleasant feeling lasting forever, then when that pleasant feeling inevitably goes away, then there can be that suffering or that wishing for it to be otherwise. And then one can contemplate with perception how might that which we perceive determine happiness or suffering. By taking how we perceive the world to be reality, then in case our perception is mistaken, then that leads to suffering. So in a sense, one can experiment, one can sort of bring to mind these 5 aggregates and try and see how they might manifest in one's experience, and then how one might be creating a sort of image of a self around those, based on those 5 aggregates. And then talking about the mindfulness of death, Ajahn Santamano often mentions this sutta of where the Buddha is asking various monks of how they practice mindfulness of death. And then one of them says he practices thinks of death just for this day, that it's not certain if he will at the end of this day he will still be alive. And then it gets sort of shorter and shorter until one of them says that just being certain of this breathing in and then breathing out, so that just that in-breath or that out-breath, just being certain of being alive just for that time. And then the Buddha praises that as a sort of real practice of mindfulness of death. That sort of cultivation of that awareness of impermanence in one's ordinary life. Imagine if one was able to do that just for a day, just for then how would we relate to whatever we may experience? How would we relate to those people we meet, those people we may care about, especially people we may care about? We can easily start to take them for granted and then forget that they too are beings subject to suffering. But if one was able to cultivate a sort of awareness, a sense of impermanence, then each encounter would become much more meaningful, much more. One would put much more care into how we interact, our acts, our actions through body, speech, and mind. And then that sense of the ethics or ethics or sila, not in a sense of a moralism of, oh, I must be good or I must be pure, but rather a recognition or a choice, something one chooses in each moment to not do action that through body, speech and mind, which might cause harm to oneself or others. Ajahn said something like, people say they want happiness, but they do not do but they keep doing the actions that bring suffering. And people say they don't want suffering, but they don't do the actions that bring happiness. And there's one of the suttas that says something similar. I cannot remember exactly, but something like if someone says that they are dear to themselves and they do actions that cause harm to oneself or others, then they are acting as an enemy acts towards another enemy. But if someone doesn't do actions that causes harm to oneself or others, then they are acting like a dear one would act to a dear one. And then sila also one can think of it in terms of it being like a gift that one gives to all sentient beings, a gift of fearlessness. So by not choosing not to do actions that cause harm to oneself or others, it's beings that one encounters, they can feel safe. They do not need to fear that that we will harm them in some way or take something away from them. And then there can be that sense of safety. And the extent to which we are able to do that for other beings, then that also comes back to us, that we too experience that sense of safety, that sense of well-being, that sense of fearlessness. It's a sort of gift of a trustworthy person, gift to our environment. And then regarding the five khandhas and contemplating them as impermanent, as suffering, as not self, in the Buddha recommended doing this again and again. And then in one of the suttas he goes through who are the people who should do this contemplation. So then he starts off with just someone who is unenlightened, and then he goes to stream entry, once returner, non-returner, and then he suggests that all these beings, it's beneficial for them to rightly contemplate the five khandhas. And then even for an arahant, he recommends contemplating the five khandhas in this way, because I think he says something like that leads to a pleasant abiding here and now, and the arising of sati sampajanya. So not only for those who are unenlightened, but even for an arahant. And then if in real life we encounter these realities of old age, sickness and death, obviously just thinking about it or contemplating them is not the same as when we encounter them in real life. So then also to relate to these things with from the point of view of compassion for oneself, and then if one notices that it is not leading to a sort of peacefulness, a sort of disenchantment, and one is getting the mind is getting caught up in a sort of negative mind state. Then one can sort of bring to mind other contemplations of one's own goodness, contemplations of metta, contemplations of compassion. So it's obviously one gradually learning to trust oneself in terms of what one's particular needs may be. But especially recently I found this contemplation of impermanence very helpful. So then I thought I would just speak a little about that. So I think for the moment that's what comes to mind. So I wish you well in your practice, and thank you.